welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Zone, where we look at the paranormal through the eyes of the paranormal investigator, the ufologist, the cryptozoologist, and the people who believe in Wiccan. We've had a lot of great guests on recently. My co-host is with me, Bob. Hey, Bob, how we doing?
Good, Tom. How are you today?
Good. It's been an exciting day. We had a guest lined up for today, and the ghost in the machine with the Skype kind of went south, so we're going to bring him back, and he had a family emergency across the Great Pond. So today we're going to talk about, we haven't really talked about UFOs much in the last couple of weeks, so we're going to talk about two big cases that happened in New Hampshire. One of them was real big, and the other one's pretty big, too. In fact, one of them's got a historical state marker named after it. So we're going to talk about the Betty and Bonnie Hill incident. And, of course, we're getting into the summer season. Summer turns into fall. And what a great time to go to a UFO festival. And Exeter is the place to go. And we're going to talk a little bit about the incident in Exeter. Is that correct, Bob?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. And I think that you're accurate about Betty and Bonnie Hill. Betty and Bonnie Hill had so many variables to that report and so many things that did into that whole situation. For example, one, which I thought was very important, was that in 1947, as you well know, the Army released a press release erroneously saying that they had recovered a flying disc at the Roswell Ranch.
Right.
And the reason I bring up the Army releasing that, they quickly came back, said that was a mistake, and tried to cover it up. But that's for another show. But I bring it up because that was really the launch of UFO sightings in this country. We had seen a lot of things before that, but people really never talked about it. And because of that erroneous report, when the Betty and Bonnie Hill incident we're going to talk about now happened, you'll see that the military got involved in that very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that situation.
Yes, it did. And it's real interesting how fast the military gets involved with these things.
Well, correct. And we all understand that they do that for two reasons. One, they want to capture, one is really a legal reason. They want to capture evidence before it gets taken as souvenirs and or destroyed. But the second reason, and the big reason is, Tom, that they want to control the narrative of that. They don't want Tom or Bob picking up a piece from a flying disc that we can't identify and being able to release that to the public.
Correct. And you
right? They really want to control that narrative.
That is true. Totally agree with that. So let's get into the history. Who was Betty and Bonnie Hill? Let's probably start there.
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, there's a lot of variables in there. First of all, Betty and Bonnie Hill had an unbelievable situation because back in those days, interracial marriages caused people all kinds of problems, frankly, in this country. And those two people lived in New Hampshire, way, way up, both well-educated folks, both highly thought of in their community. And they're coming back through the White Mountains when this incident happened.
Correct.
I'm going to let you talk more about the actual event taking place. But when you think about these people coming public, as our listeners listen to this, understand the pressure that they were under to tell their story. And ultimately, Tom, told their story and gained very little from it. They didn't write books. They didn't appear on television. They didn't get paid for any of their information they gave. And a matter of fact, they were criticized both by our military. They were questioned as to the validity of what they were saying. So these people really came forth, in my opinion, my humble opinion, because what they told, the story they told, is actual.
Correct. And what's interesting, the first time I heard Betty and Bonnie Hill, I've gone back to this show many a times on this radio podcast and even my TV shows. You've heard me talk about this show, Unsolved Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries did an episode on them back in the 80s. And I forgot when it was, 86, 87, somewhere in that ballpark. And they actually put Bonnie under hypnotherapy, and he told the same story. So, I mean, this is a legitimate story. I mean, this family, around 10:30 at night, driving home from vacation in Niagara Falls in Montreal, just south of the Lancaster, New Hampshire area. Betty claimed to have observed, something bright in the sky.
Right.
She saw something, and on U.S. Route 3, Betty also thought she saw a falling star, and it moved upward. Well, falling stars move downward, not upward. Betty urges Bonnie to stop the car and look closer, and when they stopped, it was at a scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountain on right up there on Route 3. And, in fact, it's in the area of the Indian, if I remember correctly, Indian Motel or something. It's another one of those stone structures in New Hampshire, like the Old Man in the Mountain. Later on, they did put a New Hampshire historical marker there. But she's driving through. She uses the binoculars and observes this odd-shaped craft flashing with multicolored lights, which many of us have seen if you've done any type of UFO research. And through the binoculars, what was reason was they thought originally it might have been a commercial liner traveling toward Vermont or on the way to Montreal. However, it soon changed its mind because without looking as if it had turned, the craft had already descended into their direction. So, things are starting to happen, and, the object came closer at one point. The object passed down about restaurant and a single tower at the top of Cannon Mountain, and near the Old Man in the Mountain. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile. Although they were 1 mile from Indian Head. They were not at the Old Man in the Mountain site. So they were a little off. But if you're not from New Hampshire, and if I remember correctly, Betty was born in Newton, New Hampshire, and Barney was born in Newport, Virginia.
Okay. I believe you're right.
So they were, they're not ever looked at the Old Man in the Mountain, so that's where they figured they were. They were at Profile Rock, and now there's a state marker there. But Profile Rock is a pretty big stone if you've ever been up there. I've been lucky enough to drive up there. Have you, Bob?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Yep.
So, it's a pretty big aircraft, and all of a sudden, this huge silent craft hovered about 80 to 100 feet above the hills. And so when you start looking at all this, you're going, what is going on? And then, it approached Bonnie, estimated at about 50 to 80 feet. And then a national investigation. So he reported this to NICAP, this whole incident. And that's what started this right off the bat. And, of course, Betty has dreams of all of this. They went under hypnosis. And, it's a real interesting story how this all transpired. But at the same token... Yes, Bob, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the psychiatrist that they went to was Benjamin Simon, if somebody wants to Google that.
Right.
And he specialized in those days in something fairly new, and that was hypnosis. But one of the things, when they hypnotized both of them in two different sessions, they actually told the exact same story.
Correct.
Which other psychiatrists said it would be impossible for two people to be hypnotized in two different rooms and have the same exact details if it wasn't true.
No, you're right about that.
Yeah, that kind of told everybody, the military and all of the other people that were trying to keep a lid on this, that that's pretty compelling evidence right there.
Yes, that is very compelling evidence right there that, something did happen to them. And, of course, Betty's dreamt about this right till the end of her life. I mean, this stuff didn't go away. Bad dreams. This stuff doesn't just go away. I mean, I've met UFO abductees. I have friends that are abductees. Some of them deal with it differently than others. I know one lady who's been through a lot in her life. She has a UFO support group, and I've had her on my show. I think you had her on your other radio show, but it's not an easy thing. It really isn't. It ruins people's lives. It certainly does, and we have to remember too, in this particular case, both Betty and Barney Hill were abducted along with that because they were taken aboard a craft, which they described in detail the interior. Right.
But their examination was, pretty detailed. They took hair samples, for example, nail clippings. They scraped some of their skin. They actually inserted needles in, large needles in and around the arms, legs, and spine area. So I think today what we recognize maybe is that they were looking at DNA because in the spinal area, that's where our legs or arms, for that matter, that's where they'd be getting DNA results.
Right. And that would line up with, and I can say this name online because she's said this on my TV show more than once.
Right.
But that's where Audrey Hewen says one day she woke up and she wasn't feeling right, and she goes to her doctor and she's pregnant, and she almost has a heart attack because I won't use the exact words she said, but she said it's been over 10 months, 11 months, a year since I've been with a guy. So, I mean, we're all adults here. It's usually a 8 to 9 month period. If you haven't been with somebody in over a year and a half, well, you start thinking about Jesus and the Bible at that point, Immaculate Conception. But then, a few months later, she wakes up, blood all over the place, and she goes to the doctor, and the baby's gone. Not died, but been removed. She swears up and down she still sees her child today.
Wow.
So, I mean, you could actually catch that on a couple different shows that she's been on. She talks about that. So
yeah, the other thing that came out of the Betty and Barney abduction was the fact that there's at least a rumor that Betty had asked these aliens where they were from. And they really never answered her, never gave her a direct answer. Mm-hmm. But under hypnosis, they asked both Betty and Barney Hill to draw maps of the inside of the ship and anything they saw in the ship. And although Barney doesn't, Betty draws a star map that once it was investigated turned out to be extremely accurate, considering she had no background in that particular field. Mm-hmm. So she drew it from memory of something she saw on the craft. I mean, I think that, again, that drives to me to say, how would that woman do that if she did not have that kind of an experience?
Right, exactly. And I'm looking at the
I mean,
star.
you and I have dealt with UFOs and the night sky and everything for quite a number of years. And I don't think I'm capable of drawing a sky map other than the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper and stuff like that. But she actually drew a sky map of a detailed, horizon, if you will, that we didn't even understand yet.
Right. And I'm looking at the star map. You can pull the star map up online. It's incredible.
Yeah. How can our listeners get to that?
What, the star map?
Yes.
I just Googled Benny and Bonnie Hill. Then I went to Wikipedia. And then from Wikipedia, just scan down after you read it. And it comes up immediate aftermath, Betty's dreams, medical, Simon's hypnosis, and then analyzing the star map. Just click on that.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'm looking at this going, wow. Because it's just incredible.
Yeah, and she drew that under hypnosis.
Right.
So again, looking at hypnosis, it's a situation where it's pretty well documented that you won't do anything under hypnosis that you normally wouldn't do. So when people say, you see TV shows that people are hypnotized and they go out and murder somebody, that's false.
Untrue.
That doesn't happen under hypnosis.
No.
All hypnosis really does is open up the mind, and it stops you from lying or deception. You can only tell the truth under hypnosis.
Right. And hypnosis is used by everybody, I mean, to a degree.
Right.
So.
Yeah, there's no doubt that you and I have talked to abductees. There's no doubt that people have been abducted. I would think if we went back 30 years ago, I would have said at this point, I'm not sure. Today, I'm positive that it's happened. And I think part of that is that Betty and Bonnie Hill story. I think for years, since 1961, when the incident happened, people have been trying to debunk this. People have been trying to say, well, that was just two people's imagination. And yet, every time they've tried, they have failed over years.
Right.
So to me, I think that if Betty and Bonnie Hill in New Hampshire can be abducted, then why would we think people anywhere else wouldn't be? I mean, certainly Betty and Bonnie Hill weren't the first and only people abducted.
No, in fact, the people I mentioned earlier about the baby being born here and aliens coming into our society as, human aliens, if you want to call them that.
Right.
They were originally abducted in, I believe it was Ohio. Their father worked on a military base. That's why those two sisters traveled a lot. They're military, I guess you call them military brats or something. Their father was in the military, so they traveled a lot. They ended up down in Lakeville, which is the Bridgewater Triangle. And in fact, one of the guys, and I always forget his name. I had him in a couple of my events. It escapes me, but when he was a kid, he was with them on a UFO. They didn't even know each other. They met later on in life and goes, I remember you as a kid. You were up there with me.
Yeah, see? It's amazing, isn't it?
No, it's real interesting what is out there. I mean, and of course, for New Hampshire to agree, and we have to thank our good friend at Granite Sky, who will be at our event July the 19th, right, Bob? Yeah. Sandown, July 19th. I'm drawing blanks. We have to thank our friend, Mike Stevens. He really fought with Benny and Bonnie Hill's niece to get a historical marker put up. But the state of New Hampshire agreed to put it up.
Right.
So
I understand that both of them worked extremely high. I had her on my other show years ago. She is really just a great storyteller of that story, frankly. She gives great detail and everything else. I think it's safe to say she's toured around the country telling that story.
Correct.
Right.
No, she's been all around the country. And it's real interesting.
Right.
I mean, listening from the family view and listening to Mike and everybody else talk about it, and then listening to, like, the Hewen sisters and other people I met that we will not mention names because they didn't want their names mentioned. Right. And you met a whole bunch of those people. It's a very interesting and scary time, and you wonder why these people have PTSD. You know?
Oh, there you go.
I mean, let's think of this logically, okay? So you work at a company for 30 years, you know, and I know, Bob, you just lost your wife, so, I mean, but you're married and everything, you know, you have those rocky roads in those relationships. Everybody does.
Right.
No marriage is perfect. They say it's perfect. They're living on another planet for sure. They got to be an alien, okay? So, you know, you could talk to your friends at work about your marriage problems if you trust them enough to keep their mouth shut. And you become friends with certain people, right?
Right.
But that's one thing. That's a tangible. Everybody goes through marriage ups and downs. Some of them survive, some of them don't. You know, everybody goes through a kid, maybe, not everybody, but a lot of people go through families with kids with drug addiction. And you're trying to work and deal with your kid having drug addiction or mental illness, but you got friends at work that will support you and you can talk to her. That's a tangible thing. They understand it. But imagine you're out with the wife or the girlfriend and you're driving up north and you're cruising home one night and it's late and all of a sudden you end up in a spaceship. And they start injecting you with shots in the arms, under the arms, wherever. They take whatever samples they want from you and they don't care how they get it. Doesn't matter where it is. And you wake up the next morning and you're out in the woods somewhere with your car and you drive home. You go to work on Monday morning, who the hell are you going to talk to? Because you know the first thing they're going to do is send you to the hospital.
Right.
And I don't care if you're a small, you know, company, framing company, carpenter company, or a international, you know, suit and tie and computer company that fixes computers for the U.S. government, you know, and wherever the U.S. government has offices, England, Abu Ghraib, you name it. You will never be able to hold a high clearance like that. So people are afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, too, that I've heard from abductees that as bad as the experience may have been, that it's almost as bad as nobody believes their story.
Right.
And I think that's what has such a grave impact on people after the fact.
Yes.
That they've had this experience, they want to tell their story, and yet people treat them like, yeah, I don't think that happened. So the frustration levels rise because they really don't have an audience. And I think that's what Mike Stevens' group does very well, by the way. That they give them a voice in a support group with other people that have had those type of experiences. So part of that support group has to be that they now have a chance to tell their story without being criticized.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing. And if we think about, let's think about this in a bigger picture. You just said something that really got me because I have friends. You know, I got friends of different age brackets and stuff, you know.
Sure.
You know, me and you are catching up in age. I'm just turned 84. Just kidding. But I had friends that fought in Vietnam. Look at the way they were treated. We're treating UFO abductees the same way.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They came back from Vietnam and really had nobody to tell their story to. No. They were booed. They were spit on. People wouldn't hire them.
Nope.
They blamed our troops coming out of Vietnam for some sort of a war action. They had very little to do with the decision to do it.
Right.
of course, at my age, I was in the Army during the 60s and watched, lots of guys go to Vietnam and come back in really bad shape, very bad shape.
If they made it.
And when they did come back, there was no support for them here in the United States. It was a very bleak time in our country, which I hope, as a sidebar to Betty and Bonnie Hill, but I hope this never happens again, because people lost their lives, their limbs, their families in some cases. They came back addicted to drugs in some cases. It was a terrible, terrible war. And it was a war, whether we want to admit that or not.
Oh, no, it was definitely a war. And, it's really sad because some of these people are still dealing with things like the UFO abductees are dealing with that the government don't want to talk about. Let's talk about Agent Orange, for example. How many Americans did that kill?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I mean, everybody forgets about Agent Orange.
What abductees will also tell you is that when they're abducted, and some of the tests that they put them through, like Betty and Bonnie Hill experienced, they did a pregnancy test. They were testing for DNA.
Right.
So were they testing for DNA to recreate the DNA? Or, in fact, did they create the DNA and they were checking to see evolution, how well it's taken over? A couple of other things with Betty and Bonnie Hill was that Betty had a dress on that she wore back for the trip. And when they got up the next day, the dress had been torn in many places. But part of it was that there were these powder stains on the dress. Mm-hmm. When they sent those out to 5 different laboratories, independent of each other, so they sent it out, and nobody knew the other laboratories were doing it. They all come back unable to identify what the substance was. Mm. Now, we can argue back in the 60s that the technology we have today, didn't exist back then. We know that. But still, if it was a substance that came from our planet, why couldn't it be identified by 5 different laboratories?
Because it didn't come from our planet. It came from another...
There you go.
It couldn't even come from our universe.
The other thing I thought was interesting about the story was that Betty and Bonnie Hill were wearing watches at the time of abduction. The watches stopped when they were abducted, but the watches never worked again. They took it to different, repair shops. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with them, but the watches ceased to exist. And looking at UFO research, you have to wonder that we, living in this planet, look at a clock, and it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, bedtime, wake-up time, lunch, dinner, so forth. I wonder if time in other zones, other dimensions, doesn't account for anything. Because, frankly, time is self-created.
Right.
Right?
Correct.
Time isn't like air or water. Okay. Time was created by us.
Yes.
So when you look at their watches not working again, it just, I don't know, it gets me thinking about, did the aliens not recognize time? For lots of reasons. They might be in a dimension where life goes on forever. We can't imagine that, right? Because we get old and we pass away. But they may live in a universe that they never get older.
Right.
So we need to get out of the box thinking to say you can't take our standards and apply it to a universe we know nothing about. Yet, I believe aliens know almost everything there is to know about our planet.
They probably do.
And I think that leads us to the next incident, at least in New Hampshire, that it can't be discounted to a point where every year, and you and I have participated in it, but every year they actually have a festival, right, in Exeter. Interesting thing is the sidebar to that.
Didn't happen in
the actual. Yeah, the actual sightings was in Kensington,
right,
about 5 miles from Exeter.
But Exeter had the police department.
That's it. So it got known as the Exeter incident.
Correct. And that is, really interesting into itself.
Well, it is. I think it is. And the other thing, too, just like Betty and Bonnie Hill, that these stories, if you will, have gone on from 1965 and is still in the headlines today. Now, think about that. I mean, we lost a president in our lifetime, JFK.
Right.
And certainly JFK story went on for a long time.
Right.
But in the last 10 or 15 years or so, you don't hear much about the JFK assassination. I think it's like the Lincoln assassination, right. Correct? I mean, that went on for a very long time, but we don't hear a lot about that today. And yet Exeter, the event in Exeter is still in the headlines.
Well, because in Exeter, we'll get to that in a minute, but, oh, God. What are we, 2024? Probably 2015, 16, somewhere around there.
60 years ago?
No, 2015, 14. So, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I was working in Exeter. And I was working Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at a little shop, a little place in Exeter called Lemax Market. And inside was Boulet's sub shop, right? So I was working for them. And I come to work on my day Thursday, and Lee's like, look at the paper, look at the paper, look at the paper. Take them home with you. I have them. There was a UFO sighted in Exeter on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah.
They had kid drawings on the front page of the Exeter newsletter, the Hampton, whatever the Hampton paper was called, I forgot now, Hampton Union or whatever. Every newspaper we sold had some story. They had their own twist of what was seen that day. They had kids' drawings in the paper, what was seen that day. And if you read the whole story, it was the Seacoast News Media outlet out of the old Pease Air Force Base, all the newspapers they run. So it was the Exeter Union, Hampton, Manchester Union Leader had something in it. Every newspaper we sold had something in it. And the Exeter Time and the Hampton Union there, they ran it for like a couple weeks. I have all those articles somewhere, okay?
Right.
But what's interesting is the guy that originally spotted it was a customer. And I know this customer, and I forgot the guy's name now, but his name was in the newspaper. He's a retired Air Force pilot, and he knew what he was looking at. He said he had seen many of those throughout his life. Not just in Exeter, but across the world.
Oh, sure.
And what else is interesting is about 15 minutes after it was sighted, in 10 or 15 minutes, if my memory serves me right, I'm going off of memory, of course, folks, but if my memory serves me right, within 10 or 15 minutes it was seen in England, the same size craft that was seen in Exeter that day.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, they had to get across that big lake called the Atlantic Ocean, but, that means that thing's traveling at a good distance for 15 minutes later in England, because our planes don't even drive that fast. That's over Mach 1 plus. And I don't know any United States military helicopter that flew over Mach 1 plus.
Yeah, plus, in Kensington, there were several sightings by numerous witnesses in weeks leading up to that Exeter event.
Right.
So there is no doubt, and probably because of Pease, I think you're right, Tom. I happen to have been stationed at Pease back in the 60s for a while, and it was, younger people today don't realize this, but it was a full-blown Army base. Right. I mean, we had barracks, and we had an airport, we had everything out there. So we know that UFOs tend to gravitate at least towards silos. They, with nuclear material, they gravitate towards Air Force bases, military bases. And I think that's an observation process that they're doing looking at military and weapons.
Well, I also, when you look at, we're going to continue with the incident in Exeter, but when you look at the stuff that happened in the Ossipee Triangle in Ossipee with the Conocoma bodies that disappeared, the pictures, and the UFO cave drawings on the lake maps and stuff that I have seen, caves, underground caves and everything in the Ossipee area. And around here, you have to wonder if these ships aren't stopping here. Let's look at TV. I mean, there's refilling stations for TV shows that have, ships that fly through space. So, using that logic, could they be using nuclear waste? Could they be using lava? What are they using? Is it natural minerals? Unnatural minerals left over by our tests that our government runs? So what are they using to fuel these ships?
Well, that's interesting because you and I have had conversations, quite a few of them, that if you went all the way back to Roswell again, which I believe, it's just my opinion, that they actually did recover a spacecraft. I also happen to believe that they did recover alien bodies. But all of that aside, I can't help but wonder, Tom, if you look at technology, the internet, Skype, I mean, all the technology we have today, was that a byproduct of us re-engineering what we found at Roswell? Because it was shortly after Roswell when they started to come out with really high-tech aircraft, meaning the United States at least.
Right.
So you wonder, was that re-engineered from what they found? I have no proof of that, right?
No.
There's no way to really go back. But and then, another story to that is I knew a stewardess back in the 70s. I'm not going to tell you her name, but she flew for Eastern Airlines. And she had been a stewardess for quite a number of years. And she said on at least 2 or 3 occasions, because back then, believe it or not, the cabin door to the pilot's cockpit was left open many times. We didn't have the security we have today where they're locked in, you can't get in, they can't get out type thing.
By the way,
but
speaking of that real quick, we'll throw something interesting in there. Back in the 70s, you could even smoke on an airplane.
That's correct, yeah. I mean, one of the things that most airlines did was when children, small children get on the plane, they took them up to the cockpit.
Yeah.
And parents got pictures in the cockpit with them, and I mean, that's how open it was. But
right.
She tells the stories that on at least 2 or 3 occasions, the pilots sent a message back to her saying, come up, have you and the other stewardess come up front. They actually went into the cockpit and actually saw a vehicle that was just tracking that aircraft, not far off their nose. She said, it was hard to identify it only because it was in the distance. And the other 2 stories, she said you could tell something was there, they just didn't know what it was. So airline pilots, Navy pilots, all of these people, they've experienced all kinds of UFO sightings.
Oh, for certain.
But the airlines, after the first time, they got that crew into a room and warned them with the risk of their job, which you got away with in those days, with the risk of their job, not to repeat this story to anybody.
Right.
So even back then, the cover-up went to very high levels and across many channels to make sure, because, of course, the military, they could control Navy pilots, right, or Air Force pilots.
Right.
Because they owned them. I mean, once you joined the military, you were theirs. But employees of Delta and Eastern and all these other airlines, they owned them because of their jobs.
Right. And if you spoke out at Delta and you lost your job, well, Eastern Airlines isn't going to hire you.
That's correct.
Or whoever.
It used to be called years ago blackballing.
Yes, it's illegal now, but back in the day, it was not illegal.
Yeah, and back in those days, Tom, you really didn't have whistleblowers like we have today.
No, so there was no whistleblower law.
Right. I mean, people just didn't do that back then. Today, we have a lot more people with a lot more courage, apparently, because they're willing to come out. We've seen it in politics. We've seen it in aviation safety. We've seen it all over the place that people come out and tell, what's actually going on. But again, I only mention that because UFOs have been sighted numerous times in this country over the last 70, 80 years.
Right.
It's been covered up very well.
Oh, no, there are newspaper clippings that I have on me in my car and in beer boxes that I haven't had time to organize them. They talk about different UFO sightings all over the place. I've done a couple different shows on them where airplane pilots are now not afraid to come out to speak about incidences of airlines and UFO sightings. And what I...
So let's go back to Exeter for a minute, because I have a question for you, because I know that you are really... at least in this conversation, you're the expert on Exeter. I'm really a novice when it comes to it. But tell me, Tom, why you think there was no abduction in the Exeter event, either the weeks leading up to it or the weeks after it. Because it's my understanding that there was a young boy, I think, a young boy being in his teens, that first spotted this. Wasn't he with his girlfriend or something?
Correct.
Yeah. I can't think of his name, but he's the one that went to the police station and reported it, I think.
Correct. He was the one that reported it. So this 18-year-old Norman Muscarella was hitchhiking home in Exeter. Now, back then, you could hitchhike up on 150. Yeah. Today, I would suggest nobody hitchhike. Let's just throw that out there for safety reasons. No hitchhiking allowed.
You might get picked up by a UFO.
Right, or something else. So Muscarella had just graduated from high school the previous June. So 3 months before, after his graduation. He's working hard. He's got a job. He's hitchhiking home. He puts his fingers up. So he had graduated 3 months. He was 3 miles away, 3 weeks away from leaving for the service for the United States Navy. He had been visiting his girlfriend at her parents' home in nearby Amesbury, Massachusetts, about 10 miles. And he left and hitchhiked home. But the way he would have hitchhiked home, Amesbury, what are you doing, Well, if you know that area pretty well, Amesbury, and you get out of 150 in Amesbury, and you just keep going straight, and you're in Exeter. So after reaching Kensington, a few miles outside of Exeter, Muscarella noticed 5 flashing lights in the sky a distance away. He originally thought it might have been a police car or a fire engine. As they drew closer, he noticed they were up in the sky. And he went to one house that belonged to, so there's brilliant, like one house, so they saw the brilliant lights flying in the sky, and the object was 80 to 90 feet above, 80 and 90 feet, 24 to 27 meters in diameter. He became terrified of the object, which I would too.
Right.
So he ran to a farmhouse at the Russell farmhouse, pounded on the door and yelled help, but nobody answered. The Russells later stated that they heard Muscarella at the door, but were too frightened to open up the door. The object had moved away and disappeared into nearby woods. Seeing the headlights approaching car, Muscarella ran to the road, forced the couple to car to drive him frightened youth to the Exeter police station. Now, why Exeter? Well, he was going home to Exeter. He didn't know where else to go. And, back then not every town had a police department. So Exeter, the kid was shaken. He talked to Reginald Tolan, who worked at the night desk. Tolan knew the Muscarellas and was impressed by his obvious fear. He knew the family. Back then, when you were a cop, you knew everybody in town. Exeter's small today. I bet it was a lot smaller back then. So Officer Eugene Beltran Jr. Took off and went looking for this thing. And sitting in his car near New Hampshire 108, Beltran stopped to ask if there was a problem, and the woman told him a huge object was flashing and lights followed everything. So he was then he talked to somebody else, and then later on, Bertrand saw the same thing. So now you have police reports. You have all these reports coming in, and that's why this story has survived. Because you actually had legitimate people, and we're not saying the other people weren't legit, but quote legit.
Well, and what's interesting again about how the government tries to cover stuff up, there was a group called the Project Blue Book. For those that don't understand that, we'll let you go ahead and Google that, read it for yourself. But it was a group of people put together by the government to investigate UFOs back then.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Project Blue Book, Tom actually tried to say to people in Exeter that it was really 5, I think they called them B-47 aircraft of some sort, but I assume that they're very big aircraft. And they were doing military maneuvers in the Exeter area.
Correct.
And that's what the police and this young fellow and his girlfriend and other people saw. But it's interesting that about 2 or 3 weeks after that, Project Blue Book rescinded what they said and wrote it off as it was a clerical error, that there were no B-47s flying in that area that particular night.
Mm-hmm.
So you see what they do is they throw it against the wall, right? Yeah, we had some B-47s. That's what you saw. And then they realize, okay, that's too easy to uncover. So let's go back and say that was a clerical error. But they never come back in Project Blue Book and define what did we see then.
Right. And there were all these people went back to the Exeter police station and filed reports. So there are reports on these things. And then, of course...
Plus it was...
What?
Right.
Yeah.
There was also 2 or 3 police officers
that
saw this.
Correct. And then, not only did that night, so the regular... there have been other sightings up near Exeter High School. Just to give points. Now, when I give points away, I'm not telling you who told me this, and it may not even be those people. But even over the apple orchard on, what's that, Exeter? No, I forgot the route number now. So when you go up Route 1, you're heading into Seabrook, go through Seabrook, you're in Hampton. I always forget the name of that road. It's where the Hampton Falls Historical Society is, and the church with the beer bottle. Take a left. There's an apple orchard out there. There's been sightings over that apple orchard. I've seen things coming home late at night because I worked up in Exeter for almost 10 years, and I was coming home at 8, 9 o'clock at night. And those roads in the wintertime are pitch black, folks. There's no street lights out there. Trust me, there are none. There are sightings all over that area.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, about the Exeter, what was in 1965 it was? So when you look at technology in 1965, we still had, single-lens cameras with film in them. I'm not even sure we had discs back then. But, if you look today, hopefully with iPhones, iPads, the technology that's available to us, and this is what I tell people that want to do UFO research. The most important thing about research to me is the evidence that you can uncover and document. Because what you and I know from being paranormal investigators, that if you took a picture of a spirit and we showed it to 10 people, 5 of those people are going to say, Tom and Bob made that up. They photoshopped it.
Right.
The other 5 are going to believe us.
Right.
Okay. So when people say, well, you got this evidence and you could have photoshopped it, that's very true. But if you want to really capture something, you need to catch it on film and let the soothsayers make their choice.
Right.
But if you don't catch it on film, then what you have is a great story, like Exeter, but frankly, you have no hard proof.
No. And that's... Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's the bigger problem, because I get reports from different people all over the place about UFOs. You get them too. And there's no pictures. Yes, they're happening all around Exeter, the 108, 150 area, constantly. But that doesn't mean that would have happened. Oh, and by the way, the guy who I mentioned earlier, I actually found the article. Joe Nickel. He was a prominent skeptic of. No, that's the guy that said there was nothing there. But James McGaw was the retired Air Force major, and that was back in 2011. They saw those UFOs. Yep. That incident I talked about. I couldn't remember the date. I actually just found it. And originally they said it was KC-97 tanker aircrafts leaving Pease. And the guy who was the retired Air Force guy went, don't think so.
Yeah. Aren't those the aircraft that refuel or something?
Yeah, they're the refueling tankers. You know, you fly and the plane slides underneath it, click, and that's it.
You know, the other thing I try to tell people all the time that are interested in these subjects is anybody can go out at night and look at the night sky.
Right.
Now, one of the things that I've observed in my last 4 or 5 years with a lot of night sky watching is that satellites and other stars that move and so forth are going to throw you off. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
Sometimes you see something at night in the sky moving and you figure it has to be a UFO. It can't be anything else.
Right.
The situation is that's what research requires. UFO research is the toughest thing you're going to do because you've gone to the triangles.
Yep.
And if somebody sights a UFO in the Salem-Wyndham Triangle, you go back 1 night, 2 nights, 40 nights. How many nights do you go back looking for it? Because there's a chance it's never coming back to that same spot again.
Correct. Where with ghosts, there's a chance it will come back, at least.
That's correct. That's the difference.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean we give up or quit on doing UFO investigations.
No.
You have to have a lot of patience. You have to have the telescopes. You have to have strong binoculars. You have to have, in my opinion, recording equipment. It doesn't have to be top shelf, very expensive.
No.
I mean, today, an iPhone will serve the purpose for almost everything we just talked about.
Right.
Right? I mean, so I say to people all the time, you're having these experiences, but you're not documenting anything.
No.
So your frustration is people aren't listening to you. Well, it's because you really don't have anything in hand to show them.
Right.
And that goes back to abductions, Tom. You know, like you, I have talked to abductees. I will admit not many, but I've talked to a couple that I really believe have been abducted and been abducted more than 2 or 3 times, frankly.
Right.
Because what I try to do is when they tell me a story, I take copious notes. And months later, we'll be talking about the same story, and the facts don't change.
Right.
Right?
Correct.
So you say, wow, that's a small fact, but that fact has remained constant throughout these conversations.
Right.
You know? And again, I feel bad for people just like I do when a house is haunted. You've run into this many times, and a spouse doesn't buy in.
Right.
It's really difficult emotionally for people not to have somebody to talk to. And that's why I think Mike Stevens is such a great resource for people. Right. I really do. I've referred tons of people to Mike Stevens.
Oh, I have too. Mike is great. I mean, because he talks, Mike doesn't really investigate UFOs. He goes looking he camps out in the woods a lot. He loves the woods. He loves nature. So his eyes are in the sky or in the ground looking for Bigfoot. He does a little bit of everything. Right. But what Mike's more known for is the aftermath. Somebody that you can call Mike up and say, hey, my name is this, or hey, don't want to give you my name, but this is what happened to me, and I don't know what to do. And Mike will talk to you.
Right. And, Mike Stevens and I go way back. We actually started a show in Exeter together, and then COVID shut us down too early. But I really respect Mike because Mike's attitude is he doesn't need evidence to believe the story. No. And I think that's very admirable to me because people that were abducted have little evidence.
Right.
Scarring, stuff that's been inserted under the skin,
right?
That kind of stuff. But they don't get the attention that Betty and Barney Hill got with psychiatrists and the military and everything else.
No.
Most of these people are frankly on their own.
Right.
So Mike Stevens really provides for them a voice that I think helps them a lot.
Correct. And speaking of Mike Stevens, we got an event coming up with him, don't we, shortly? Got a few minutes special to talk about the July 19th event, correct? Yeah.
July 19th. July 19th, you and I have been working on this for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's not because we keep dropping the ball. It's just because I know you're very much like me. You want to get it right.
Right.
The July 19th event at the Sandown Meeting House really will cover multiple disciplines in the world of paranormal.
Correct.
So you can talk to Bigfoot people, you can talk to UFO people, you can talk to mediums, psychics, ghost hunters, Loch Ness monsters, investigate. We're going to have all kinds of disciplines there.
Correct.
And this is fairly unique because what we want to do is put these people in a booth,
right,
and give the public about an hour to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're very interested in mediums but have very little interest in UFOs, you still should come because you're going to get a chance to talk to mediums and find out what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and everything else.
Correct. And if you're interested in cryptids and not interested in mediumship, you still should come because we're going to have a cryptid there, a cryptozoologist of sorts, and he's going to tell you about his. And we've had him on our radio show, actually, Bob. He was great.
Yeah. I mean,
Jason Morse.
Then, I think the second phase of the 19th event, Tom, is something I've been thinking about for a very long time, and that is a roundtable discussion amongst these disciplines from UFOs to Bigfoots, because I believe a lot of this is tied together somehow.
Right.
I can't figure out how, but I think it is. But we're going to allow the audience to, on an index card, write down your question when you get there, and I'll host, and I'll read the questions to the round table, and then we're going to hear from everybody on the round table that has something to say about that.
Right, and it's going to be fun.
And I think that's fascinating because for the first time, you're really going to get a chance to talk to all of the disciplines at the same time.
Correct. And we're just waiting on a few more. Hopefully by next week's show, we'll be able to announce all the speakers. But right now, we have confirmed Mike Stevens, Jason Morse. He's be doing the cryptid
Jason's
thing.
from Bigfoot.
Jason's Bigfoot. Yep. So, and you want to go back and listen to the show on Spreaker, you're more than welcome to. I forgot what episode we had him on. But he was great. And we're waiting on somebody about Wiccan. I have somebody else. We might have two people lined up for that. We're waiting on both of them. Bob, I didn't tell you. And as we get a little closer, I'm dropping a big bombshell, which is going to be at this event. All right?
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, great.
Something that I've wanted to do for a while, but people just said no. Well, those days are gone.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Tom, that you and I are moving in a direction not a lot of people in our field of research move into, and that is trying to provide a voice for people that are involved in the discipline of paranormal, whether it be witchcraft. You know how disappointed I am about witches.
Right.
Not because I want to criticize them or I want them chastised, because I believe they have a wonderful story to tell. I really believe witches, if you heard their story, which I have, I've interviewed 2 witches. I'm not going to tell you the town they're in or the state, but they were school teachers, the 2 of them. And the hour that they spent on my program was probably the most interesting hour that I've spent in a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did have a witch on once, but she's not a what'd she call herself? Oh, she said it on her show. The Broadway. Sheila. What was Sheila?
Sheila Renee Broadway?
Yeah, Sheila Renee Broadway. She's a practicing Wiccan, but she doesn't belong to a Coven. So it's a Coven.
Right.
But, and I think we had on, we're waiting on somebody else to get back to us, but somebody I know knows somebody who is, I think, involved in a Coven. I got to get that news figured out. In fact, that lady just messaged me while we're doing the radio show. So as soon as I'm done, I'm going to get back to her. Then I will message you tonight or call you later on. But like I said, this is going to be a fun event. Oh, wait a minute. We charging? No, it's donation only. That's even better.
So that's even better.
For the public, you just walk in, leave a donate, and then at the end of the night, we're going to do a ghost hunt right in the middle of the Sandown Triangle.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, just for that segment of our audience that says, well, I'm not into UFOs, I'm really not into ghost hunting. The Sandown Meeting House, which you can Google, has so much history to it that goes way beyond the paranormal.
Yes.
It's probably one of the most active paranormal buildings in New Hampshire. But besides that, if you're interested in the history back to the 1700s, this building is all original. It has had 0 changes to it.
Right.
So when you walk into the Sandown Meeting House, you are virtually walking back in time.
Correct. And for the people who've never been there, now, you might have grown up at a camp growing up as a kid where, you had running water in the city, but an outhouse in the woods. You camp out in the middle of nowhere. I was amazed when I first walked in there. Bob got me hooked on the Sandown Meeting House, okay? I walk out back. There's not just one, not 2. I think there's 6 or 7 all connected with private walls. They were one big outhouse with individual stalls. It is incredible just to look at. I don't think I'd ever use it, but it's incredible to look at.
Yeah.
So it is going to be an interesting time. What?
Yeah, it's so original. There's no lights, no heat, no electricity, no running water, nothing.
Nope. So we'll be under flashlight at the end of the night.
Yeah, we will. But I will tell people this, our listeners, that you will get an experience out of this.
Oh, you will.
Whatever you're looking for. Because, Tom, you and I have done this so many times, and I have never, ever done the Sandown Meeting House that I did not have an experience of some sort.
Right.
I've done many homes like you. I've done buildings like you've done. And frankly, about half and half. You get good hits in some and some you don't.
Correct.
But the Sandown Meeting House, I've never been there that I didn't have a great experience with it.
Right. And that's what this is going to be all about, the experience. And
I'm excited about it. I'm really looking forward to it. And, frankly, I think if this works and people like it, because, again, go back to what you and I are about, giving a voice to the paranormal community to go out and tell their story.
Exactly.
Without criticism and fear of retaliation.
And that's why we're going to do the question and answers. You're not going to ask the question as the public. So if you want to rename anonymous, you can, because Bob's going to ask the question, not you.
That's correct. All you have to do is write it. Yep. You don't have to give your name or anything. Just write it on a card.
Right. And whoever can answer it in the group will answer it. If you get multiple answers, you'll get multiple answers.
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
So, I mean, you will be protected.
I think this has been a great show. I've really enjoyed it. You and I don't get a chance to do this, just the two of us, very often. So this was a real treat for me.
Yes, it was. And I want to thank you, Bob. And we've come to the end of a great show. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Paranormal Zone here in the U.S. and across the world. And we'll be back next week with another great edition of this episode. Have a great week, everybody. Good night.